Okay. So anyway, yeah, like I said, we're gonna finish. I'm gonna try and finish Aristotle today because, well, we're done with the ancients and we should move on to the exciting moderns, and you guys all want to hear about that stuff. So we're just gonna bang through Aristotle. We'll answer questions, we'll talk about some stuff, and then we get to move on to a different topic next week. So we're gonna talk about Aristotle's Politics today. The book is the Politics, but like we should just recover the ground we covered last week. Remember last week we went over his ethics. The question he asks in the ethics is, what is life's aim? The answer is happiness, or the word to him is eudaimonia. It's flourishing, right? It's flourishing, well-being, happiness. These are all words for eudaimonia, but it's not merely happiness. We think of happiness as a particular type of feeling, but he has in mind flourishing, well-being. How does one become happy? Of course, acting virtuously, right? This is very specific. So that begs the question, what is virtue? Virtue is a state of character defined by moderation, or in other words, in accordance with reason. How does one acquire virtue? Through habituation. It's muscle memory. It's getting into the flow state. It's you shouldn't have to think too hard about being a good person. And he thinks that we do this by being a good person. How does one exercise virtue? Through judgment and action. Action is a central preoccupation with political science, and this is where we're going to like sort of transition from ethics into politics, because politics is ethics for the masses. Another way to describe the move from ethics to politics in Aristotle is by remembering Aristotle's obsession with telos, or purpose, or ends. Everything's purpose or grand function. Everything has a purpose or a grand function in Aristotle. By observing what nature does, we can discern what something's nature is. Of course, trees become sickly, children are malformed and diseased, states devolve into civil war, yet all these are deviations from what Aristotle would say is their true nature. Human beings' nature, our telos, our ends, our function, our purpose is to be happy. Be happy by acting virtuously. Political science, the art of statecraft, discussing politics, all these are concerned chiefly with the formation of a populace that has the ability and the opportunity to act and live virtuously, since politics is the chief science of living happily, right? So that's the sort of connection. It's a sort of tortuous, sort of logical connections, but essentially politics is the art of teaching us how to live right, live well, live happily. And so that's what we're going to discuss today, how politics fits into the virtuous and thus a happy life. So Aristotle's political vision is, again, it's virtue for the masses, right? The most virtue is achieved through politics. Thus, the most happiness is achieved through politics. The political vision of Aristotle is communitarian in nature, not communism, but it's communitarian. It flows through the community. It doesn't flow from the individual. The individual is that's a modern notion that we'll get to starting next week, where politics flows through the individual. Aristotle is very much politics, life really flows through the community. And so we act virtuously together. We exercise our reason together. We achieve our nobility together. It flows from the group. It doesn't flow from the person or the individual. And so here's our matrix for the course, right? Today, we're going to sort of complete Aristotle's matrix here. His citizenship is one of active participation. His idea of freedom is a freedom through citizenship. It's a civic form of freedom. It's not a materialist or a individual rights-based form of freedom. It's a civic, citizenship-based form of freedom. And the economic realm in Aristotle is subordinate to freedom and citizenship. Economics are a distraction from freedom and citizenship. If you're concerned with economics, that means you're not living well. That means you're merely existing. You are living the life of an animal. You are living the life of eating, fucking, and shitting. The realm of the wives at home, right? The realm of women is the realm of eating, fucking, and shitting. That's economics. That forms the subsistence of living. We political men, we public men are above all that. We get to go out into the agora, into the public, and practice freedom through our citizenship. We don't have to worry about cooking and eating and all that stuff. That's all economics, right? That's subordinate. It's not as important. Great. So again, Aristotle's Politics. He wrote it at the last years of his life. Composed intermittently between his death. It's likely lecture notes. After Plato dies, right, he starts his own school, the Lyceum. It's likely compiled of lecture notes, as of all of Aristotle's notes are. The text itself is incomplete. There are large gaps in the text. It creates kind of a challenge for interpretation. The substance of the politics is of the work Politics is derived from Aristotle's study of 150 constitutions from throughout the ancient world. And I should tell you what he means by constitutions. Again, it's a fairly modern thing to write down a constitution, right? We have a written constitution in this country. What he means by constitution is just how does the government look? What does this state look like, right? It's like, how is it organized? Who does what? What are the sort of like institutional guardrails, one from the other? It's very much what we think of when we think of constitution, but it's not a physical document. So what he does is he has his students go out across the Greek world and embed themselves within, these places, and then they come back and then and they can sort of discuss what do these constitutions look like. So we had somebody go to Sparta, somebody go to Thrace, somebody go to Sicily, somebody go to Lesbos, things like that, right? And they all come back, and through his lecture notes they can sort of create what we think of or what he calls the constitution of these different states. So this is a work of comparative politics. In political science departments at universities, oftentimes you'll take a class called comparative politics, and they do something like this, where you sort of study different states, different regimes, and we derived some insight or truth from the comparison, right? And so Aristotle was really the first comparative student of comparative politics. This is an inductive argument, right? Very different than Plato's Republic, for example. Aristotle starts with observation and then generalizes down to theory, which is backwards than what Plato did, right? Plato starts with a theory, starts with the perfect regime, starts with what he thinks is the best way to organize things, and then he goes out into the world and determines where things are deviating from that. Aristotle goes out into the world, finds out what constitutions actually look like, and then comes back and writes a book called Politics. So this is an inductive argument, right? Great. So as of just an overall outline of what the things I want to talk about, and then we'll have maybe a break or something like that, and then we'll talk about something else. First, we're going to talk about the hierarchy of communities in Aristotle. Second is couples and households. And then thirdly, how they coalesce into villages and city-states. Then we're going to talk about nature and politics and their contrasting nature. and then lastly, citizenship and rule. And so first, is there any questions before I get going? I do kind of want to go quickly because there's some really cool stuff we can do at the end, but I see Rick's here. What's up, Rick? Any questions? Cool. Okay.
Hi, sorry, I was muted. I'm driving.
That's okay. What's up, dude? So hierarchy of communities in Aristotle. Politics is it's a hard read because almost right off the bat, he hits us with like some pretty hard to swallow things, right? Right off the bat, he sort of like sets out in a rather unargumentative way that the city-state is, above the village, which is above the household, which is above the couple, right? That when two people come together as a couple, they do so for various reasons. They do so out of love or out of, I'm going to mute you, Maverick, because you got some weird shit going on. They do so out of love. They do so, to better run a household, right? They create a household. Households cannot sustain themselves alone is part of the argument here. And so they form a village, right? Somebody's household is really good at raising chickens. The other person's household is, it's think of it in like a political economic terms. Some people are really good at farming. Some people are really good at fishing. Some people are really good at making textiles, etc. And so these households form villages, right? In service of living, in service of achieving ends, right? Achieving the ends of living. And then these villages end up forming city states, the political community. And they do so for a different reason than households end up forming into villages. They do so to achieve what Aristotle calls living well rather than just living. But before we get there, we have to talk a little bit more about the hierarchy, because he seems to spend a lot of time talking about the natural rulers and the natural ruled, who belongs in charge and who belongs to be ruled. And yeah, it's just not a very nice thing, right? So this is basically what he says. The soul and the body are the basic constituents of an animal. The soul is the natural ruler, the body the natural subject. Moreover, the relation of male to female is that of natural superior to natural inferior, and that of ruler to ruled, right? He says it right there, page 8, and this is kind of, it goes along with these sort of fundamental hierarchies in Aristotle, of ruler to ruled, soul to body. Ruler to ruled is hierarchy's form. Rational nature over animal nature is the most natural form of hierarchy among humans. Rule of the rational over the animal is what makes us human. We have achieved humanity because of our domination of our animal selves. He's not denying that we're animal, but we are some sort of special animal because we've been able to sort of overcome our animal nature. And he sort of thinks that same sort of like power dynamic, that same sort of like overcoming our animalistic nature is the same sort of dynamic that a man rules over a woman, right? That a parent rules over a child, a master over a slave. So he reads into these natural human hierarchies. He reads natural human hierarchies into other social forms, right? So there, it's debatable whether we should say, that maybe it's not debatable to say something like human beings have achieved something that animals haven't because we've been able to overcome some sort of quote nature. But it might be more debatable to say something like men rule over women in the same way, right? That seems to be like an extra step in logic that maybe we're unwilling to follow Aristotle towards. But what we could say he does here is he naturalizes hierarchical relationships that he sees in the world. Remember, it's an inductive argument. He goes out in the world and he sees what's happening, right? He sees that men are ruling over women. He sees that masters are ruling over slaves, parents over children. He says, this must be natural because I see it in the world. So what's the theory that explains this? And he says, well, there's domination happening, there's power happening, so it must be natural, right? So that's what I mean by he naturalizes it. He sort of sees a social dynamic happening in the world, and he infers that it is a natural dynamic, right? He takes a conventional form and rationalizes it into a natural form. Takes a contingent form and makes it into a law of nature. So, we can just sort of like look at what he actually says about slavery in regards to this, because it's quite interesting. So he says this, therefore, those people who are as different from others as body is from soul, or beast from human, and people whose task, that is to say, the best thing to come from them, is to use their bodies, are in this condition. These people are natural slaves, right? So those with the bodies of a slave, those that are strong, they're tanned because they're out working in the sun all day. They're 6 feet too, they can lift a huge block. These people are naturally slaves, obviously, right?
Black and Jewish.
Yeah, God made them a certain way, and so therefore that's why they're slaves, right? He looks around them and he sees people whose excellence, these people who are good at being slaves, right? their excellence seems to be the use of their bodies for the service of citizens' needs around them. And he calls them natural slaves. Right. And then so he elaborates, nature tends then to make the bodies of slaves and free people different. The former strong enough to be used for necessities, the latter useless for that sort of work, but upright in posture and possessing all the other qualities needed for political life. Right. So natural freemen can exercise reason and possess all the qualities necessary for political life. The natural slave can understand reason, but not exercise it. And they also have the bodies suited for hard physical labor. So what's wrong with that logic? I guess all this is in, like I'm sort of laying out why Aristotle thinks this is, but what's wrong with, like, why is he, like, what is he mistaking here? You know,
Nothing. That seems pretty chill to me.
Well, so
We
we
talked-
talked about last week.
we talked about it last week. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so what was it? I forgot. What did we say?
Well, if any of us were working in a field our entire lives, and genetically through the last 100 years of our, fathers, we would also be in that position as well. It's not that God made them; it's that
Or
they-
we've made German
Yeah.
short hair pointers, right? You like bred dogs to be pointing dogs or hunting dogs or
Yeah.
companion dogs, right? You like bred
Yeah.
humans to fucking work on fields.
Right. Yes. And so like, again, it's creating a sort of like human contrivance, or it's sort of ascribing a nature to a human contrivance. It's something like there's been some power move here, right? There's been a sort of like a political power, like an effort to sort of politicize something and claim that it's natural when there's actually been some sort of social dynamic at play, right? And so this transitions into the natural hierarchies that exist between men and women, parent and child, because he sort of justifies familial hierarchies in the same way. This is what he says. He says the deliberative part of the soul is entirely missing from a slave. And what he means by a deliberative part is
deliberative.
right. What he means by that is sort of the reasoning, the higher order thinking, right?
Because they never went to school or like ate good food.
Precisely. Right.
Yeah.
A woman has it, but lacks authority. A child has
He
it, but
said
it is
that?
not. This is right. This is the quote that he's saying about it, about justifying familial hierarchy. A child has it, but it is incompletely developed. So Sonny there has a deliberative part of his soul, but it's not developed yet. And so social hierarchy then, it sort of tracks the degree to which one is deliberative. And again, this is through empirical evidence. He's looking out into the world and he says, well, I'm not saying it's like a good thing. It's just true. No woman, he observed, possesses great deliberative faculties. He's never seen that before. And so why would he write a book saying that it's, that women can reason? At the same time, if no one, right? So, and like, just like you said, Maverick, if no one has an opportunity to exercise deliberative faculties, how is one to become deliberative, right? And so this is again another example of the sort of naturalizing hierarchy that happens, very quickly, very early in Aristotle's Politics. Just something to say, whenever you teach this in like a college class, all the blue hairs, as you guys like to say, get all freaked out right away. And so you have to sort of tell them, well, he's making a mistake, it's just a simple mistake. And, we have to sort of proceed like there's something else here to talk about, sometimes.
So you lied to him?
Well, we have this whole long discussion about whether or not we should cancel Aristotle, right? Because a lot of them would want to cancel.
Just about to say, so if this dude is this obviously wrong about this pretty major aspect and fundamental piece of his argument,
Mhm.
why is he even still being discussed? I mean, obviously the dude has written many, many, many things, and I feel like you're bringing this up now so that we can get it out of the way, right? But I am a little bit like,
What's the point?
the
Well,
dude
I
literally
think-
just said that, black people do not have brains. So like, why are we even considering?
Well, I think Wouldn't you say like a big part of it is that he probably has been like drinking too much pasteurized milk, and so as a result, his brain chemistry is like demented?
Right. Does he have milk-borne pathogen illness? Or
Well, like, yeah, so again, like this is like, we have this discussion all the time, you know, a lot of students want to cancel Aristotle. And then so there's a couple different responses that I've developed over the years. It's like, okay, well, the type of student that wants to cancel Aristotle is the one that's really excited to read Marx, right? Is really excited to sort of read more stuff that's like, that's coming later, maybe that's going to be more about social justice or stuff like that. And so I say, well, if you want to understand that stuff, you have to read this first. You know, you have to sort of like read the folks that these people are standing on the shoulders of. The folks that you really like read this stuff too, you know? So that's like the first thing I say to them. The second thing I say is like, well, there's so much here, like you said, Maverick, there's so much here that like, you know, you can sort of separate the wheat from the chaff, you know? If you can separate the wheat from the chaff, there is a lot to be gleaned. And thirdly, I think the most important reason why it's important to like read this is because he teaches us a lot about our own mistakes that we make. We naturalize all sorts of stuff, you know, in the same way that we could sort of easily point at, you know, the mistakes that Aristotle's making as far as naturalizing the hierarchies between men and women, rulers and ruled, slaves and masters. It gets us, I think, to be a little bit more introspective about the things that we think are natural. I think that's a really interesting, you know, thing to think about. It's like, well, what have I sort of uncritically accepted as true, as a true of like of nature, rather than something that has been sort of constructed, you know? And I think that's one that gets students to sort of think like, well, yeah, I mean, it sort of helps us think. It helps us like refine our own, sharpen our own knives on the whetstone, right? He's a whetstone to sharpen our knives against, right? That's the purpose of this. It's like, come up with a good argument why this is wrong. I ask them, and then they can't, and then, you know, they have to stay in class, you know. So those are the three the ways that I respond about it. Do you guys have any thoughts about that? Why we should or shouldn't cancel Aristotle is the question.
I mean, I think that the answer is pretty obvious here. Like, we just have to keep, you know, we study mathematicians that are now we know are completely wrong, you know?
Yeah. What about Newtonian physics is right at this
Right.
point?
Exactly.
Yeah, I think it's like obviously only a fucking idiot would want to cancel Aristotle, and it's like he's obviously says a lot of stupid things, but he also lived like thousands of years ago, and he also said a lot of important things that were formative in current Western thought, right? So it's like, grow the fuck up and recognize its history and move forward.
Yeah. A lot
I
of it
still-
is a sort
right.
of growing up. Yeah, don't cancel him because
Can you imagine what he would say about like the whole transgender sports thing going on right now? Holy moly.
He wouldn't really like that a lot. Yeah.
He wouldn't like that at all.
He wouldn't like, you called him a reactionary last week, and I think that's pretty, that's actually a good,
Yeah.
in the sense that a reactionary is somebody that sort of wants to preserve hierarchy, which is not Dave Rubin, what's his name? Corey Robin, which is Corey Robin's definition of reactionaries.
Yeah, Corey
Aristotle-
Robin would say Dave Rubin's a reactionary.
That's true. But he also would say Aristotle's one, and I think that's true as well. Just because Aristotle very much thinks that natural hierarchies are important to the well.
So all joking aside, did Aristotle want to approve these hierarchies because he saw himself as the beneficiary of them, or did he just truly believe this is like, for better or worse, this is just the objective reality?
It's the objective reality. He always likes to avoid moralizing. He thinks he's a scientist, and he thinks he thinks he's like identifying what's going on in the world. Interestingly, he wasn't even a citizen. He never sort of enjoyed, you know, the fruits of being on top of social of like the social ladder. He was what's called a medic, which is like a foreigner. He was like a sort of non-slave, non-citizen foreigner in Athens because remember, guys, he was Macedonian, right? He was from Macedonia. King Philip's, son, Alexander the Great, was Aristotle's pupil. And so Aristotle lived his whole life basically in Athens but was a foreigner. And so he didn't really get to have many of the sort of perks of being a sort of straight white male or whatever, right?
Bummer.
He wasn't there. Anyway, so let's move on. So we're still in hierarchy. So the couple, the household, the village, the city state, these all sort of flow from another. The quote here is the first thing to emerge from these two communities is a household, communities, couple. But the first community constituted out of several households for the sake of satisfying needs other than everyday ones is a village, right? So when you can set your sights beyond just your mere subsistence on a day-to-day level, then you can form a village with other households. A complete community consisted out of several villages, once it reaches the limits of total self-sufficiency, is a city-state. So once a group of villages are able to sort of live amongst themselves, they're self-sufficient. They don't have to seek out other outsiders. They don't have to go on expeditions to conquer other villages to get their resources. Once they've reached self-sufficiency, that's what's determined. That's how we determine what a city-state is, rather than just a collection of villages, right? Self-sufficient is the city-state. And once this happens, once you reach self-sufficiency, you're able to live for a different purpose. Rather than mere living, you're able to live well, right? So political life, the city-state, it comes to be for the sake of living, right? In the same way I went through that train of logic, right? Couples form into households, households form into villages, villages form into city-states sort of naturally. It happens naturally for the sake of being self-sufficient, for the sake of living. But once that happens, they are able to seek out a better life rather than just sort of satisfying their mere economic needs. They can live well, is what he says. Once all needs are met, we become capable of political life. Political life aims at the communal achievement of the good life, right? And so he has something else to say about this. I should pull it up. I wonder if you guys can you guys see this? So still early on, he sort of talks about the economic life and how sort of striving for accumulating the most money, for lack of a better word, right? Just to having your life be about accumulation. It sort of misses the point of life. And so what he says is those of us, right? I can include myself in here. The reason we are disposed to acquire as much as we possibly can and are not really concerned with living well, it's because we are preoccupied with living, not with living well. And since our appetite for life is unlimited, we also want an unlimited amount of what sustains it, beyond what we need, right? And so we sort of missed the point. That like we've achieved the political life, we've achieved the city state. We don't need to worry ourselves with economics anymore. And so if you're still worried about it, if you still think your life is just about accumulation of economic goods, you've sort of missed the point. You guys have the political life. We should like seek it out now. And so this is what Aristotle has to say. And so we've talked about hierarchy, we talked about couples, households. We got all the way. Now we need to talk about nature and politics. We're going to turn to page 4 for the $64,000 quote. This is maybe the most famous quote from Aristotle, and it concerns our nature as the political animal. It is evident from these considerations, then, that a city-state is among the things that exist by nature, that a human being is by nature a political animal. So it's sort of naturally inevitable that humans form into these communities, that form into, city-states that we become political. We don't fulfill our nature unless we participate in it. It's our telos, it's our ends to be political. It's our ends to be, seeking virtue for the masses. And so what does he mean by political animal? What he means is naturally social in some respect. Like you have to be naturally social. It's not only that, but it's unnatural to be alone. And it's natural for humans at their best to deliberate and act together for the sake of achieving the best life possible. It's the best life obtainable according to reason and judgment. In other words, there's no private flourishing without public flourishing. And so the good life then is living in accordance with objective standards of good and bad, right and wrong. And humans are uniquely prepared for this because we have speech, we have reason, we can sit together and like talk about what's going on in the inner recesses of our brains. We can theorize about morality. We can talk about ethics. We can stand upon the shoulders of our progeny or our ancestors. They have written things that we have like sort of begun our intellectual lives with. And so, this written word, the speech, logos, this allows us to overcome, again, our economic natures, the realm of eating, fucking, and shitting. We don't have to live our lives based solely on that. And we get to sort of come together and discuss these higher, more lofty ideals about life. And this is unique to humans. And so therefore this is our sort of purpose, is to do this. This is what Aristotle thinks. What do you guys think about that? That's like a really sort of like foundational central idea in Aristotle.
I mean, it's super close to that book. That book by Israel Noah Harvey wrote. That's basically what this separates us from the animal.
Do you mean Sapiens?
Yes. Sorry.
Sure. I actually haven't read that book. And so you'll see.
He talks about it's not communication or community that really separate us from the animals. There's plenty of other animals that do that. Bees, bats, whatever. There's all kinds of people who are all kinds of species who are communal by nature. But what we are different about is like we talk about our ability to gossip is really what he says.
Okay.
To theorize and solve issues by talking about them.
To abstract, maybe, right?
Yeah, well, to say, hey, be careful. Plenty of animals can say, hey, there's food by the river, but no animal can say, hey, there's food by the river, and I saw a lion over there this morning, so be careful. Don't go around this part of the river. That's what he said. Anyway, I just think it's interesting that Aristotle is saying essentially the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think.
So it's important. The important part here is that he thinks that that the political life for humans is a natural part of our lives, right? It's what we do naturally. We didn't have to contrive it. We didn't have to sort of. Another way to say what we're not doing when we're doing politics is doing art. We might read some other folks that say that politics is a form of art or artistic sort of expression of sort of like virtuosity or something like that. Aristotle would say it's not art, it's nature, right? If like art imitates nature or something like that, that's not what we're doing. We're not imitating anything. What we're doing is we're doing something that is like ingrained into us. It's a sort of it's a form of like political biology, right? It's like a part of our, like next to the human being in the dictionary, Aristotle would write, the political animal. That's like what he would say about what a human being is. That's what makes us who we are. And so because of that, right, it's sort of, it implies, and he does spend a lot of time talking about this, it implies that we're not doing, we're doing something really wrong when we're not like fulfilling our political selves, when we're not sort of like achieving politics together or something like that, or we're not doing politics. We have sort of failed in being a human being, right? Or we're engaged in some sort of like lack of humanity by doing that. So we can actually move on. And then so this is an interesting claim here. So he says it's about the priority of the political. The city state is also prior in nature to the household and to each of us individually, since the whole is necessarily prior to the part. And so this is a problem, right? Because Aristotle has just explained to us how city states evolve from households and families, how they come together to form villages, and then the villages form into city states. And so he's telling us now something else. He's saying that the city state is prior to all these other things. How can he say that the political is prior? It seems like he's trying to like ham fist like this idea that the political is natural, and so therefore it's before everything else. The complicated answer to this problem is that the household as we know it, the village as we know it, in their perfect forms, they have only come about and can only come about once the city state is perfected. Like we can't have the proper household until it is sort of told how to act based on, you know, the city state's mandates. The simple answer again is the proper organization of our households and villages depend upon wisdom accumulated through political life. That again, we are sort of indebted to our you know, to our grandfathers and to their grandfather. Like we're sort of indebted to the sort of long train of society that has come about in order to and has, you know, served to teach us how to raise our children, right? It doesn't come to us fully formed, right? It comes to us because we have been ingrained through society how to be a good father, right? And so again, so this is why sort of like, you know, the collective pursuit of politics, the pursuit of like of calling the good, of saying things are good and bad, of doing virtue, of finding out what virtue is. This happens before we're able to be good parents, good husbands, have a good life, right? Have a good household, have be a part of be a good citizen of a village. So the political is prior. And like I said, because because we are naturally political, because of our political natures. Oops, I skipped a little bit. It implies some sort of problem exists when we're not being political, when we're not being public, when we're not being communitarian. And so what he says about this is that anyone who cannot form a community with others, or who does not need to because he is self-sufficient, is either a beast or a god. So he's not it. So again, this is him sort of revealing his communitarian nature. He's not an individualist, right? He doesn't believe in the sort of rugged individualism of, you know, staking out on your own in the wilderness and being a homesteader, for example. You know, he thinks that that is not life well lived. Human beings fulfill their grand function when they're living amongst other human beings and determining what that group's ethos is, what that group's purpose is. So anyone who cannot form a community with others, or who does not need to because he is self-sufficient, is either a beast or a god. Another very famous Aristotelian quote. Does that inspire anything in you guys? You guys have any thoughts about that one? And then in the coming weeks, we will read folks that really disagree with this.
I just agree.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
I agree, but I'm not one to say like somebody else shouldn't live the life that they want to, right? Who am I to tell somebody?
Okay, I see. Yeah.
So like, yeah, for me, I would feel the most fulfilled being around, you know, people, but other people aren't that way and maybe not feel the same way.
Yeah. So like experientially, you've enjoyed your life more when there's community around you.
Yeah, sure.
But like,
It's-
yeah, who's to say if others don't
We
live that
could
way?
we could add autistic to beast and God to the list there, you know. There's
Little
other people who
Asperger's, little Asperger's on the
yeah,
spectrum.
there's other types of humans who, you know, I guess beast is what he would consider that.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, and so another way he says this, he like rephrases it in the next page, but he says like it's either beneath us or above us to not be a communitarian, to like not like feel the need for community is it's just not what a human being is. A human being, he thinks, is one that seeks this as a sort of fundamental part of like what makes them them.
Well, a lot of people get messed up when they go into solitary confinement, so
Right.
there's probably some truth in that.
Yeah, totally. Okay. Okay, so yeah, we're moving to citizenship now. This is like what lasts from Aristotle is a lot of his discussion about what a citizen is. This is like everybody's like obsessed about this. So he says, this is another famous quote, but he says I should tell you what the unqualified citizen is. So he says the unqualified citizen is defined by nothing else so much as by his participation in judgment and office. Someone who is eligible to participate in deliberative and judicial office is a citizen in the city-state. So again, what he means by unqualified here is there's like if I was going to qualify a citizen, what he has in mind is like, oh, this person earned their citizenship through some exceptional deed, or they earned their citizenship, or he might say like that's like a sort of that's a child. So we might grant them citizenship, but it's a sort of childish citizenship, right? It's a sort of like we're not there yet with them. And so what he means by unqualified, he means like you don't have to qualify it. Like you don't have to sort of like put an adjective in front of the word citizen to describe what this person is. You can it's just a citizen. That's what he means by unqualified. Sometimes that's a confusing part. But so this is like interesting, right? He says it's literally just participating in judgment and office. So you're part of the assembly, you're part of a council, a jury on a regular basis. And you're sort of participating in judgment. What he means by judgment is like you get together with your fellows and you think and talk about what's good. What the good is. What is like what is going to be good for the community? Should we go to war or not? How much should we tax the pottery makers? Should we have a tariff on these goods that were being imported? Participating in that sort of life is what he means by citizen. That's what he means by citizen. He doesn't mean the sort of like stamped label on somebody who's born in a certain place. He doesn't mean like when we hear the word citizen, we think of something that has been granted by the government, some sort of status that has been granted. But it almost seems like what Aristotle has in mind is like you achieve your citizenship by caring about the public, right? By sort of like engaging in public service, or by sort of like having a part of your life be about being
Are you able to hold those positions without being a citizen first?
So everybody would be able to, provided you're not a slave or a medic, and those things are sort of known, like, or a woman, right? everybody has the ability to, who's like white and not a slave, right?
Got it. Okay.
And
so
a
all
man,
these people are essentially citizens already.
in the sense that they can do this, but like
Got it.
you only really achieve it when you do it. It's
Got it,
kind of the
okay.
idea. Yeah. Yeah, so it's just a really interesting discussion of what a citizen is. It's because it's different than our own. It's like a different sense of that word. And he goes on, he tells us that the capacity to rule and be ruled in turn is praised, and being able to do both well is held to be the virtue of a citizen. So knowing how to rule and be ruled, know how to take turns, Be able to see political life from the perspective of both the ruler and the ruled. Be able to appreciate the complexity of politics from perspective of both how we are to be governed and how we govern, right? Both the governed and the governors. Public happiness versus the hard choices, right? Having both of those visions, both of those perspectives in your mind, that's a good citizen. A good citizen will be able to see the whole globe from all of its perspectives, right? And so proper rule then is ruling as one would wish to be ruled, right? The quote here is, there is a kind of rule exercised over those who are similar in birth and free. This we call political rule. A ruler must learn it by being ruled, just as one learns to be a cavalry commander by serving under a cavalry commander. And so we get this, and I've mentioned to you guys this before, and so we get this idea that the ruler in Athenian democracy is a sort of first among equals, that you get sort of chosen, or you sort of elect yourself, or you oftentimes it's by lot, right? It's by lottery that you sort of end up in the assembly. But fulfilling that role, in that capacity, you're not seen as any better than anybody else. And in fact, it would be very sort of uncouth to sort of look at yourself as better for participating in this. But you're first among equals, right? It's valuable, and people aspire to do it, but you take turns. It's also just as important to be a good ruler. It's just as important to learn how to do it by being ruled. And so that's a really interesting idea. It's where we get that idea from. Oh, and so he has this really, this is an interesting thing. So he's using this word rule, and perhaps it gets confusing because early on we talked about the hierarchies. Ruled goes over ruler, or ruler goes over ruled, right? There's this distinction between ordinary rule and political rule. Ordinary rule of men over women, and rule of men over women, rule of parent over child, rule of masters over slaved. This is the rule of the household, right? This is the rule of economics, of the economic realm, of the private realm, which for Aristotle is not the most excellent realm, right? It's the realm of our most animal-like functions: eating, fucking, and shitting. Eating, reproducing, and laboring. This is not human excellence. This is the things we share with animals. And so that the rule in that realm, correctly organizing that realm to where it's most efficiently operating, by all means do so. Have the rule of masters over slave, over women, over children. But it's not excellence rule. It's not political rule. It's ordinary rule. It's second rate, right? Political rule of men over men, right? That's political rule. Rule of men over men who take turns at ruling and being ruled. Rule within the polis, the public realm. Rule over matters concerning the city, which will live on after we're gone, right? Political rule is excellent because it concerns extraordinary matters which transcend the endless cycle of nature, eating, fucking, and shitting, right? Political rule is excellent because it constitutes and contributes to something more beautiful and lasting, the city and its glory. Furthermore, political rule is excellent because it occurs among equals and is reciprocal. At the same time, the excellence and equality among citizens largely derives from the fact that it is exclusive, right? It's exclusive of women. It's exclusive of slaves. Political equality in ancient Athens was enjoyed only within the political class, right? And so they pat themselves on the back. They say, we're a democracy. As you guys remember, we read Pericles. They very much love this idea that they have rights and equality, and they care for each other on on equal terms. And yet, when we say us, we know who we mean. And so we should, again, we're going to talk again about this distinction between the political and the economic, because this is like, this becomes like a really important point. I won't harp on about it too much because I think you guys get it. But it is the original meaning of economic, right? Economic means economicus, pertaining to matters of the household. That's, you know, it's like acquiring goods for the house. That's like economics. And so that's not political, right? Political is like grander than that, right? That's the idea here. And so I'm going to switch slides because I actually have what I want to say on a different slide deck. Any questions so far? No questions.
I mean, I have some, but apparently
What's
I
up?
participate too much. So
No, I want your participation. Tell me.
Just kidding. I don't really have any questions.
Okay. Derek, you're being an asshole, dude. Let him speak. I don't have a schedule. This is fine. So anyway, yeah. So again, economic versus political, right? This is this distinction. The polis comes to be for the sake of living, but it remains in existence for the sake of living well. Economic versus political. So we're going to address nature and workings of a city-state. Aristotle's analysis of the best regime. There must be some organization of politics to where we are able to achieve our best selves, right? That's the idea here. So that's what we're going to do. The aim of the political community then is we do have this natural desire to live together. But that only, and so here I'll actually find the quote because it's an interesting quote. We've talked about this natural desire to live together. You know, we mentioned it earlier today. Right. He says, first, then we must set down what it is that a city-state is constituted for and how many kinds of rule deal with human beings in communal life. In our first discussions, indeed, where conclusions were reached about household management and rule by a master, it was also said that a human being is by nature a political animal. So he's sort of like referencing himself right here. That is why, even when they do not need one another's help, people no less desire to live together. Although it is also true that the common benefit brings them together to the extent that it contributes some part of living well to each. This above all is the end then, whether of everyone in the common or of each separately. So what does it say there? We have this natural desire to live together, but that only establishes our natural sociality. It doesn't really, it doesn't quite explain what it means to be a political animal. To be a political animal is to participate in common enterprise of discovering and realizing common benefit. For only doing that can we realize our own individual good, because the community is prior to the individual, right? In Aristotle. And then he, specifies the nature
Brian,
of that good.
this all sounds really reminiscent to me of fucking homeboy. Who is it? John Locke's Social Contract. Am I getting it right?
No.
Is that right?
We'll talk. We're going to talk about John Locke in 2 weeks, and he would be like, "Hell no."
Wait, really?
Community before individual? What are you talking about? Community is just a collection of individuals.
But it isn't his whole thing. Okay. No, I'm just trying to understand. I'm not arguing with you.
Yeah.
But didn't he say that? Isn't that what we do? Like we enter the social contract to mutually experience the benefits of it?
You're right. Yeah. So you're right. The social contract theory is in here. This idea that like we come together to achieve something that we couldn't do on our own. But Aristotle goes beyond that. He says that not only are we doing some sort of social contract when we're forming into a political community, we're actually achieving some sort of like natural sense of ourselves. Like we're achieving something that human beings are uniquely doing.
It. So Locke's is like, we enter in the social contract so I can get some shit out of it, like so I can get some more paper out of it.
Yeah.
And Aristotle's like, we come together to like talk about fucking the universe and shit and
Yeah.
elevate our consciousness.
And only then
Okay.
are we actually even being human beings. Locke would be like,
Okay.
Locke would say something like, we're much better off alone on a homestead. But the reason
Got
we
it.
can't do that is because we end up killing each other. We'll
Got
talk
it.
about that in a second. So we end up
Okay.
having to form a political community because my neighbor would steal my shit all the time.
Okay.
And we need to have a fucking.
But it's interesting, right? Because the outcome is still the same.
The outcome is the same, but like, there's a different, because they start somewhere different. They don't end up in exactly the same place, right? The political community that Aristotle prescribes to solve for the problems is different, you know? Like Locke would say something like, we just need a something that guarantees our individual rights.
And again, yeah, we don't have to spend a lot of time on it. It's just that makes sense. That's just interesting.
Yeah.
That's just interesting to me.
Yeah, it's similar in that they both form a form of political community, but like it looks different, you know?
Sure.
So the aim of the political community, again, the reason why we're political animals, what he means by that is a form of virtue politics, right? It's like, I mean, that's really what Aristotle's all about, right? The good life is a life of constant ethical and moral improvement, contemplation and enactment of goodness and justice. But to discover that, we have to participate in the community, right? We can only discover goodness and justice together. And the aim is not just the achievement of character, not just a state of our individual souls. The aim is the performance of good and just actions. Because again, if you guys remember, performance of good and just actions is how we become happy, and that's what the point of life is, you know. That was the reason why we had to start with the fucking ethics last week. I have in my notes here that I should tell you about page 81. I'm not positive if that's a good idea though.
About what?
Right. What's that? So again, so he says this is his quote. He says, political communities must be taken to exist for the sake of noble actions and not for the sake of living together. Hence, those who contribute to the
Interesting.
Right, so that's different than Locke, you know.
Totally.
Locke,
No, that just invalidated everything I said. You're right.
It's okay,
Yeah.
but like, yeah, it's a virtue politics. It's not a sort of like
Sure.
economic politics, which Locke would say something like, no, we form into political communities to
Sure.
improve our economics, you know.
Yeah.
And Aristotle says like, no, we get to be our most virtuous selves when we're political, and that's how we become the most happy. Hence those who contribute the most to this sort of community have a larger share in the city state than those who are equal or superior in freedom or family, but inferior in political virtue. And those who surpass in wealth, but are surpassed in virtue. So the best citizen, of course, right? As you guys can probably logically guess, the best citizen is the one that is doing politics, not the one that is acquiring wealth. And that's the person that's going to be the most happy, right?
Does he distinguish first, there's the two questions. One, does he quantify happiness achieved or like distinguish levels to it? And two, does he distinguish like the efficacy of that participation in terms of the level you reach on his happiness scale? I.e., is it like, as long as you just show up at the Agora and fucking babble, you're going to be the happiest guy around? Or like, do you have to like enact works of meaning and legacy in order to truly achieve happiness?
Yeah, I think you're right. The latter. There is a whole chapter about like, you know, somebody could just go like you said, go to the Agora and babble. Like, I think that's a really, like, he says it differently, but like, he understands that like he's sort of leaving open an interpretation that says something like somebody could just fucking dick around and not actually do anything. And so he makes it a real point to talk about action as an important part of the puzzle here, right?
And action meaning being differentiated from activity, right? Action being different than just empty activity.
Yeah, what he means by action is like being engaged in the discussions or perhaps actually building like a dam that the city needs, whatever, like
Sure.
dredging out the harbor so that larger ships could enter, some whatever,
Sure.
stuff like that. We're gonna build a new statue to fucking the gods next year, and somebody's gonna figure out how to bring the rock from that quarry or whatever. That's what he means by action. And like and that's important because that's the part that lives forever, right? Also our words do, like when we speak really eloquently and people remember what we say. A lot of this sort of like political virtue comes down to how we live forever. Remember, that's how, like what we talked about in the beginning. And so it's making an imprint upon the world.
Sure.
And that in that sense, that's where Aristotle actually has any sense of individuality.
So then why doesn't he change the way he defines this and says, and call it that, right? The citizen who contributes the most meaningfully to the city. Because I feel like if that just playing devil's, because I'm tracking you and I agree with you, but just like for the sake of argument, playing devil's advocate, I feel like if it was that straightforward, why wouldn't he just explain it that way?
Are you asking like why is this vision not consistent with like the economic life?
No, I'm not.
Company?
I'm more asking, and maybe I'm just getting caught up in semantics, but I'm more asking like the way that the words that I'm reading and the words I'm hearing you say, to me, like the superficial interpretation is like, all right, dude, I'm just gonna go fuck around in the agora and like kick it with the homies and like I'm gonna have a meaningful life. But I have to believe that like that ain't it, right? Like it's.
I mean, I don't hear him talking about balance. Like he's saying you can't just pursue wealth. You have to also be a citizen and show up.
Well, I'm not talking about wealth at all. I'm talking about like the dude that dicks around in the agora, but like he's participating versus the dude that goes out and he's like, okay, guys, we need plans drawn up for these fucking aqueducts, and I'm gonna, selflessly give 3 months of my life to doing so. Like I feel like those two things are weighted differently. They should be.
Balance is actually an interesting is actually a really good word to use to describe this. Like, remember last week we talked about his ethics and how virtue is a sort of moderation between extremes. Fucking around in the agora and just pontificating about nonsense, Aristotle would be like, that is an extreme of like you have too much of something. You have too much of this sort of like political theorizing. You're not doing enough. And so he would he wants us to aim for moderation in every aspect, and we can sort of use our reason as he would say, as you are right now. You're saying that's like, it can't possibly be this simple or be this stupid to just go in the agora and fucking fuck off all day. And Aristotle would say like, yeah, of course, that's not what I mean. Use your reason,
Okay.
and arrive at a moderate, conclusion here. And he would say like that, that's what we should pursue, and guess what? Human beings are the only ones that can do that. We're the only ones that can sort of limit what we actually want in like the immediate sense, because we know it's not good for us ultimately,
Yeah.
Like if I want to go fuck off all day, maybe it'll make me feel good that day, but like it's not going to lead to a good life.
Sure.
And that's why it's like special. That's why it's like human beings are fucking special, because we can sort of like put limits on ourselves. We can like guardrail ourselves because we can abstract, we can like reason beyond just our immediate sense.
Because we can determine how bad homogenized pasteurized milk is for us.
Yeah. And so I believe I read this quote. And again, in my notes, it's actually pretty funny because I have notes here. It says, he refines his definition of the political community, that was exactly your question, Howard. It's not just discovering what goodness and justice are, but performing good and just acts, right? That's like an important part of it. It's like acting nobly, acting virtuously. It's not just dicking around talking about it, right? And so, and I even have this here, it's my own gloss. The city exists for the sake of greatness, to be aesthetically awesome, but it is greatness shot through with justice, right? It's not an amoral regime, but one consistent with giving each his due. And so the transition then, we have to talk about like, what is the best organization of a city? How do we organize a city so that we can allow this to happen? And again, it's this distinctive meaning of constitution. It's not we the people, but the political organization or political way of life. So the Constitution is an organization of all other organizations within a city. That's another way to say the word constitution. It's like the organization of organizations, supreme form of organization. Constitution identical to ruling class itself, whether one, few, or many. His quote is, a constitution is an organization of a city-state's various offices, but particularly of the one that has authority over everything. For the governing class has authority in every city-state, and the governing class is the constitution. So the next slide for the definition, then, the constitution is the governing class, whether it's ruled by one, few, or many. There's correct and deviant forms of each. Very famously, there's the correct or good constitution exists for the common benefit. And so the correct form of, if I wish I had it, the correct form of the constitution by one is, what is it? It's like a philosophical kingship. The deviant form of a rule by one is a tyrant. The correct form of rule by a few is an aristocracy, and the deviant form of rule by few is an oligarchy. The correct form of rule by many is his preferred constitution, which is called the polity. We might use that word. We use the word republic to describe the polity. He uses the word polity. And the deviant form of rule by many is a democracy. We have to avoid democracy.
Interesting.
What's the difference between the republic and the democracy?
We will discuss this. This is the
And so did the concept of like anarchy exist?
That's exactly right. That's what the rule by many would be, the rule by the poor mob. And they don't know what's best for them.
And that's what democracy to him.
Yeah.
Got it. Got it.
Yeah, the majority of people are dumb, which a lot of people agree with, right? Then the dumb
Yes.
people would rule.
Yes. And we cannot allow for this, because this would be disastrous, not only for us, but for them, right? They would end up with the worst of all lives if they were put in charge.
Idiocracy.
Yeah. So another way that he says this, the reason why democracy is deviant is because those constitutions, they don't look to the common benefit. They look for the benefit of themselves, because they have been sort of bred into them with these forms of like desire to have wealth that they've never had in their lives. And so when they get power, they sort of they take it from those that have it, and they institute sort of, tyrannical regimes that outlaw private property and things like that, right? And so it results in a regime that doesn't have the common benefit as the ends, common including those that used to rule them, right? And so this is why this is a problem. It's a problem when we have democracy, because they will only be ruling for themselves. To be correct, whereas those which look only to the benefit of the rulers are mistaken and are deviations from the correct constitutions, for they are like rule by a master, whereas a city-state is a community of free people. So again, this is where that sort of rule and ruled come back into this hierarchy. When the wrong people get to be rulers, they won't know how to correctly do it. They have not done their turns yet. They haven't ruled and do the ruling in turn. They haven't had that sort of moderating effect upon them. Anyway, so that's very good. Oh, again, I do have this. Look at this. So this is the typology, the very famous typology. He borrows this from Plato. And the Republic has a whole chapter about this. It's the same exact sort of like typology. So the rule by few, this one in the middle here, you know, the deviation, you know, the rule by few and the deviation is the rule by the rich, right? Oligarchy for private aim. Many would say that we have an oligarchy. That's just frankly like the correct way to sort of describe the sort of rule that we have. Like it's
A
quite,
corporate oligarchy.
Yeah,
Where you
it's
have corporations or people that are also ruling the country. That's how I think of America.
that's true. And if you guys have played Cyberpunk, I think that has been sort of like expanded upon in the ways that we can maybe think about it. And so he thinks that there's a way to have rule by rich, but it works out, you know, and he calls it an aristocracy. Plato might think that like that's the best we can hope for is an aristocracy. Because he knows that because Plato, remember famously, kingship would be the best, philosophical kingship would be the best for Plato. But he can never have that because the philosophers will
Oh,
never
you want me
agree.
to be the philosopher king? No, I
Well, so
couldn't.
that's exactly what Plato would say. We can never get that because the philosopher would never agree to do it. Because it's the most thankless and horrible job in the world. We can maybe hope for aristocracy in Plato. That's what he thinks. But for Aristotle thinks that we can actually have rule by the many or even rule by the poor, but have it be for the public aim. And he calls that the polity. And we might call it a republic. We might call it, you know, our version of democracy is one that's sort of tempered by institutions that at least claim to, you know, deviate or temper the sort of wishes of the underclass to overthrow the ruling class and things like that, right? Our wishes are sort of filtered through our representatives. They go on and rule in our stead, and we might call that a republic, and Aristotle might call that a polity. But again, it might actually be better to call this.
Does he talk about like how all of these, does he have an opinion or like a prediction about how all of these will turn, the ones on the left will always turn into these ones on the right?
So that's in Plato. So Aristotle, again, he looks in the world and he writes based on what he sees. Plato's the one that sort of is fun about like thinking about how these go into each other. And so there's a whole chapter in the Republic where he talks about how his perfect republic, the one with the philosopher king in it, he's just constructed it in speech. Remember the city in speech? That's Plato's Republic. It starts with a kingship, and then it devolves into aristocracy, and then it devolves into it devolves into a democracy. It goes like this: kingship, aristocracy, then democracy, and then all the Democrats find a charismatic leader who promises to sort of, you know, kill all the oligarchs for them, and then they elect him, and so they end up with a tyranny, and then the tyranny gets overthrown by an oligarch. And so like Plato has this whole sort of genealogy, which is really fun to read. That's a book in the Republic.
Has someone like I'm sure there must be like someone who's studied how many times that's actually happened in history after he wrote that, you know? I'm just curious, like if Aristotle had another 3,000 years of these experiments happening like we do, you know, he would be saying these always turn into the ones on the right.
Well,
you know?
he sort of inspired the discipline of political science, and a lot of folks that I know are really obsessed with trying. Well, they're not. So the thing is like nobody actually goes back and reads fucking Aristotle, who does the work that you're talking about, like studying the regime turnover, regime transition. None of them ever fucking read Plato or Aristotle. You know, they just sit there and crunch numbers and do regressions on their computers. They don't fucking read theory. And so there hasn't been a work that I know of that sort of, you know, puts this to the test. You know, that would be an interesting thing if I mean, I'm interested in that, but I don't want to do the work. That sounds exhausting.
Okay.
Good idea, though. So anyway, so sorry,
From-
Rick, go ahead. Go ahead, Rick.
I say, what would you benefit from that work, right?
Somebody might grant me tenure or something.
Yeah, dude, okay.
Well, I don't
I-
know if it was really good. Maybe you'd be, the next book in line here. There'd be, it'd be fucking Aristotle.
Yeah. So the
Yeah.
best that can
Law.
happen, the best that happens in that situation, if you write a really good book, it ends up in the airports. It ends up in all the fucking airport, like grab this book on your way onto the airplane. That's like the best you can hope for. And that's like not influential at all. Like people like remember you for like the next 10 years, maybe.
So you're saying in 100 years there isn't going to be someone who wrote something this year
Nope.
in a book somewhere?
Not at all.
Wow. Okay. So so Aristotle is immortalized, but we're no longer immortalizing people.
Yeah. And so yeah, you keep bringing this up. I don't know if the answer is that we're not producing any more Aristotles, or the answer is like our society doesn't allow for that sort of excellence to sort of rise to the top. It's one of those two, right?
Yeah. Well, we're all living for the few, dude, not the many.
Right. And so, all this is sort of like obvious, what distinguishes oligarchy from democracy is who has the money. We should talk a little bit about, best laws or best men. So Aristotle eventually he turns to this question turns to the question to what is the best regime. But before getting to that question, he takes an interesting diversion. Which we should take with him. After setting out the typology of regimes, Aristotle turns to the question of statesmanship. What is statesmanship? Defining the virtue of the governing class. How to put which rule into effect, right? And so his quote here is, since in every science and every craft the end is a good, the greatest and best good is the end of that science or craft that is the most authority of all. This is the science of statesmanship. So the question then is it better to be ruled by laws or men? That's the sort of question. It's like, do we want to have the good laws on the books, or do we want to have good men in charge, right? And by men, I mean people, whatever. But best laws are the best men. He has a whole chapter here sort of discussing this. This is like an important thing for him.
Well, why are those mutually exclusive? Why can't you have both?
Well, men have power. Wouldn't the actual
Who's going to
like the
overrule each
law
other?
wouldn't?
I get it. Okay.
I think
like
that's what
the-
you were going to say, Mitch, right?
Yeah, that it's yeah.
Who's going to have the ultimate
In a way,
authority?
Don't we already have both? Like we have the laws. I mean, now at least we have laws, but then
How do
we
we
have
get men?
we have men who
Well, we have-
interpret the law, right? Who hold up the laws. We have police officers, we have judges, stuff like that. It's like a combination of both.
Yeah. But this is the question, is like, do we have the right combination? Like,
Fuck no, we don't.
I think we have to have both until corruption and greed take over, and then
It's-
restart.
It's because women are involved.
Well, no, because we have.
If
we
it was
have
more, if it
good-
was all men, all
Yeah.
dudes
Okay.
rock, it would not be a problem.
When it was straight white men, everything was smooth, right? And
Everything
then
was great.
and now we're all fucked up.
I think greed. Again, I think that if he had 3,000 years of these social experiments, these political experiments happening, he would say that it's really obvious that greed and corruption corrode both laws and men. And we have to burst asunder to the next evolution, dude. All the time. There's got to be a revolution, man. You know what I mean? That's what it's.
interesting. I mean, so the idea would be that the laws would be unflappable. Like you can't interpret them in your own way. They can't be.
Yeah, I think the correct answer to that question is the best laws.
Okay, so this is how he sort of proceeds. He says, Well, so let's consider rule by the best
Okay.
men first. He says laws are general. They speak to the universal, but the world is complex and particular, and you need highly refined, context-sensitive determinations for rule to be good. So, you know, perhaps it's better to have men, right? Because they're able to sort of like take into account the context. What's the letter of the law, or what's the spirit of the law rather than the letter, you know? Yeah, this person, their third strike, right? You guys remember the 3-strike rule? Their third strike was speeding, but like they had to speed for, you know, to save the life, or, you know, they were on the speed bus or something like that, right? So you might want rule by men in this case to like be able to make a discretion, right? Be able to have discretion.
Yeah, but you can include space for discretion in the best law.
Very good.
But
This
you
is
said
where he
But
goes.
you said 2 weeks ago, Howard, hold on. You said 2 weeks ago, you know, what happens when I, from Nambia, don't believe in genital mutilation, but across the way, they're super about it, right? And so they have their laws over there written and detailed and accounting for circumstance and situation. But then your homie comes over my border and mutilates some genitals. What now?
Yeah,
I
that's
like
not
how
that's
foreskin
that's
gets
not
brought
even
up every
relevant.
week.
That's not even relevant or in conflict with what I just said in any way whatsoever.
I feel like it is. Like what I'm saying is that you could have the best and most intricate laws ever written for your area, but then
Yeah.
you have to have men to interpret them no matter what ends up happening.
Well, I don't think the argument is like that the laws create a society of automatons and fucking devoid of human beings. The argument is that at the end
They
of the
have to
day,
change, I think.
Where's my foreskin?
This is where Aristotle ends up going. So
I don't think what
he
you're
tells
saying
us
makes any sense, Maverick.
he tells us why
Here's
rule
what
by
it
the
says.
best men might be a good idea. Then he
Two weeks
says
ago.
rule by the best laws might be a good idea too, because men are passionate, partial towards themselves. They're tricky, you know, sometimes they're slippery. Sometimes they'll wake up one day and have a bad day and like fuck somebody's life up because they interpreted the law the way that they did that day, but wouldn't have otherwise, you know. The law is passionless, right? And we kind of want that in some sense. Thus, the rule by law maybe should be more fair. And so he gets to where you guys all got to, which is that like he kind of splits the difference, right? In a very Aristotelian way, the moderate, he splits the difference. He says, perhaps it's ought to be said that a human being will deliberate better about particulars. In that case, it is clear that the ruler must be a legislator and that laws must be established, but they must not have authority insofar as they deviate from what is best, though they should certainly have authority everywhere else. So
Yeah.
what he says is
That's-
laws, when correctly established, should
Yeah.
be in authority,
Hold on,
and the
what is-
ruler.
I don't understand that at all. Like, who's to determine what is what?
Well,
the
so
fuck?
again, so yeah, he tries to split the difference, but like, you tell me where he doesn't quite.
No, I
get
think that's he nails it. 100%. He nails it.
No, dude. Because how do we know when what's best and when what's not?
Well,
That's
so this is
totally-
what he tries to say. He says this: laws, when correctly established, should be in authority, and the ruler, whether one or many, should have authority over only those matters on which the laws cannot pronounce with precision, because it is not easy to make universal declarations about everything. So that's his moderation approach. His median is say the laws can be precise about some things, but they're not going to be able to be precise about everything. And so in that case, that's where the men come in, right? That's his best.
I mean, I can. It's imperfect, but sure, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's
I don't
not
think
to like make it not to make it all political, but like that's the constitutionalist approach, right? You have these activist judges trying to fucking rewrite the Constitution and take away our fucking rights, but like that's it. This
Go
is the
ahead,
deal.
Rick. What were you gonna say?
That activists are the only ones trying to rewrite the Constitution.
I was just gonna say that it's impossible to have a perfect way. So the next best thing is to have what's the best way that we can do it. It's not perfect, but it's better than any other way.
But for sure, but that's also a slippery slope, because then you get into where we're at now, where 300 new laws are being created every fucking day, you know? Or like it's become a jumbled mess of fucking corruption and insanity. because we've all determined that this is, in this particular sense, we need a man to come in and say that this is wrong or this is correct. You know what I mean? We're bending the laws more and more and more as we go.
I wouldn't say we're bending the laws more and more. We've been changing
Recreating
laws
them.
differently since the start, right? That's just like a product of how the system is set up.
I guess
Now,
I just feel like at a certain point you gotta like
corruption. Like you don't have to go after the system for the problem. The problem is you need to go after the corruption, right?
maybe, I don't know. It just seems like it gets more and more complicated. All of a sudden it's like chaos and like, you know, there's not we're right in the middle on everything. Everything's fucked. It's just
Well, it's like
no one knows what's right and wrong.
chaos order, right? Like when chaos is supreme, then like shit's all fucked up in anarchy, right? And when order is too much, then everything's like too rigid, like strict and oppressive, right? And so there's just, you got to find the right balance between chaos and order.
For sure. I guess what I'm saying though is I just don't know yet that it seems like we haven't created it yet, right? And so I think there is an argument that maybe it doesn't exist, and instead we're just like ever changing and doing this, like, you know,
I agree with that.
balancing act between the two, you know, forevermore.
A little bit left, a little bit right, a little bit left, and we're doing that Aristotle median.
Yeah. So the reason why this is messy, and the reason why we haven't really come anywhere conclusive about this is because he's because of the inescapability of judgment, right? We have to insert judgment somewhere in here. Judgment determines when the law does not speak with precision, right? Like he's saying that, like, oh, the law will speak where it can be precise, but there has to be a man to determine where that is. You know, that's pretty squishy, and so the judge and that judgment can go wrong. You know, there's no guarantees in politics. Even the best designed regime is prone to failure, and so Aristotle chooses the median. Laws have general authority. Statesmen determine when particular judgments are needed, and that's his best. That's his best shot. You know, that's what he says. And you know, in some respects, we're unhappy with that, but like, we don't have a better option. You know, but so the median is
we're
again
getting ahead of our britches. We're getting ahead of our britches here. We're all just about eating, fucking, and
right. And so the median again.
Solution is something that we're like not capable of doing because our sole purpose is just to eat and reproduce.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
So,
yeah.
Like manifested this solution or solution to a problem.
Yeah. I like that.
We're doing that because we're like so smart that we're dumb.
You guys are gonna love the moderns. They're gonna come Hobbes next week, Locke after that. You guys are speaking like classical liberals. So anyway, so median. This is, and it's appropriate transition to the question of best regime. Median was his answer as far as laws and men. Median is also his answer for what is the best regime, and it's the polity. The best regime is a median between democracy and oligarchy. Democracy and oligarchy, you just told me that those two are the worst ones. You know, those two are deviations. How could a mediation between them be anything good? Well, that's what he says. He says that Aristotle considers kingship, since the best rulers make the best regime. If there's an individual or family whose virtue outstrips that of all others, that individual or family should rule singly. Yet Aristotle retreats from this conclusion for two reasons. No such good men really exist, and when they do, they are actually gods among men. Remember, given men's imperfection, kingship is always dangerous. For when a single ruler strays from the path of virtue, he takes the entire community with them. Furthermore, a kingship, only one person enjoys the capacity enhancing experience of rule, right? Remember, being political is like part of what makes us a human being. And so only allowing the king to do that, only allowing the king to have that sort of like virtue.
So that's fascinating to me, that he makes that distinction, yet earlier on he supposes that slaves are like just meant to be slaves. right? But then here he is later on, and he's like, yeah, but like we've got to let people be rulers. You can't just have the king because otherwise they're not able to self-actualize, and like it's like kind of contradictory, right?
But Howard, those
Well,
are
slaves
natural
aren't people.
slaves. Yes,
Yeah.
precisely. Those are naturally slaves.
Yeah,
They're
just
not.
aren't
They don't
people.
have. They don't have the logos.
Okay,
That's
I mean,
quite literally his answer.
got it, got it.
But right, but like it is important for him to like create a political community wherein the most amount of citizens are able to sort of fulfill their human.
Yeah,
self.
it just that seems a little. Yeah. Anyways, okay.
It's not great. I don't know what to tell you. It's just
Well, it
the way
just
it
seems
is.
logically inconsistent. I'm
It's
not like
totally.
arguing. Like it just seems.
You sound like my blue hair students. I'm just telling you that's exactly what they say to me.
fucking don't. That's
Yeah. Fuck you, Howard.
Anyway, so well, they all hate reading Aristotle. So that's
no. I fucking love
for
Aristotle.
that reason. For
Aristotle's
that
my
fucking
boy.
reason.
I'm just pointing out that there's some logical inconsistencies with some of the
Totally.
statements.
So anyway, only one man gets the opportunity to rule. We have to throw that out. But a polity is a mixture between oligarchy and democracy. The question then becomes how to mix them properly, right? Because it seems like if we're mixing two bad ingredients, how could they turn out to be a good ingredient? He identifies several ways. First, we're going to combine or overlap procedures. Oligarchies, they find rich. So the oligarchies, they find rich who do not serve on juries. Democracies pay the poor to serve on juries. Polity then should do both. For by doing both, you get the maximum participation from both rich and poor. Balance between the rule of the rich and the rule of rich and rule of poor. So we're going to pay poor people to be political, and we're going to fine rich people when they're not.
Huh.
That's the difference we're going to split as far as combining or overlapping procedures. We're also going to split the difference between political qualifications. Democracies have small property qualifications to take part in assembly. You might not even have to own any property to take part in the political assembly. Oligarchies have large ones. You have to have a real large stake in the society in order for us to listen to what you have to say. In the polity, we're going to split the difference. You get suitable property qualifications for polity. We're going to exclude the very poor, right? We have to. If they don't own any property, how are we going to, how is what they're going to say going to matter at all to, the political community? I think
For sure.
It's just such, I'm trying my best to sort of take that. I don't understand.
Yeah,
That's just what they
logical.
say.
Yeah.
Locke will sort of tell us why that's an important idea in a couple weeks. So we have to exclude the very poor, but we're also going to include the non-rich. Citizenry is of a middling sort. We're going to sort of have folks that are strivers, but are fairly comfortable. We're also going to mix the modes of obtaining office. So officials are chosen by lot in a democracy and by election in an aristocracy. Polity, thus, is choose them by election but eliminate the property qualification. So what we would end up doing is we would only elect those that are not very poor, the extremely poor, because they're not going to ever win an election. But we're also not going to just choose them by lot, because lot is too. It might allow for any random punter who doesn't quite have the right sort of virtues in mind. And so we have to be moderate. We have to find the median here. So this is all again, and the aim is to achieve a mean, to temper the influence of both the rich and the very poor. Why? So this is his big insight, is like middle class rule. Polity dominated by the middle class, and it's most likely to reflect the proper virtues. Why do you guys think that is? Do you guys think that's a good idea?
Yeah, for sure.
I do, because you can somebody in the middle can relate better to a poor person and a rich person at the same time, whereas a rich and a poor really can't. Like they're
Yeah.
so far apart that there's no comprehending.
Exactly. I think that's exactly what he says. He says there's like a gulf of understanding.
I love it. You guys, I'm afraid I have to jet.
Yeah,
I would
we're
love
almost-
to stay here,
we're-
but I
we're
got I
basically-
have to fucking deal with something right now. I'm sorry.
Okay, see you later.
Brian,
This is only
thanks
gonna
again,
last like
dude.
10 more minutes. See you later.
Talk to you guys soon.
What did I skip? Okay. So we're gonna transition to the nature of happiness. This is gonna be one of the last things we talk about today. Happiness consists in the development of character and intellect. These are social activities. They cannot occur alone. Question of the best regime is thus a question of what environment is most conducive to the development of the best human faculties. The fundamental question of politics is how to achieve our humanity. How do we all sort of like have the ability to and have the desire to be our natural selves, our political selves. The legislature's task is the sort of culmination of this. The task of the legislature is to study how a city state, a race of men, or any other community can come to have a share in the good life and in the happiness that is possible for them. So the political community, the reason we do politics, again, is how we started last week. The purpose of life is to be happy. The reason we do politics is because it creates the most happiness. Polity is how we achieve the most happiness, by having a moderate outlook on political life. So it requires, judgments about what the good is and to promote laws which will promote the virtue of citizens. So again, this leads to this sort of consequential moralization of politics. It's a virtue politics. Is this a good thing? We all hate virtue politics, right? Isn't that when we're virtue signaling and stuff, like this is like something that we don't want to see, it's like enough to say that you're virtue signaling to say that that's not a good thing, right? That's what happens, right? So there's a sort of dark side of Aristotle's virtue politics. If a state concerns itself with the character of citizens, it can easily overreach and impede our freedoms, right? Our ability to live as we like. This is where the liberty of the moderns come to have a distinct advantage. And so we'll turn to that in our discussion, next week and the week after of Locke. Has there been some sort of overstepping? Aristotle really makes the seeking of virtue central to both politics and life. That seems really not what we're about, right? And so I think next week we'll start talking about how that sort of begins. I'm happy with ending right now. Do you guys have any other questions?
No,
Good
thank
stuff.
you, man.
Good banter.
Yeah. Thank you, man. Thank you to Av too that invited me. I didn't know that you guys were doing this cool thing, and so I'd like to be invited if that's cool.
Yeah,
with
you bet, man. Come next week.
There's
We got
also 2 or 3 guys at our office, Bri, who are interested in coming.
Yeah, we should
I
have
don't-
sent them the link.
My question is, what are you gonna do? After this class, are you gonna keep this?
Somebody else should have I think Jeremy should teach us
Yeah.
about Ayurveda.
I'd be super down as well to hear about Jeremy's kind of experience with that too.